Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very grateful to be here this afternoon, and it's a real privilege to be speaking with you, Rebecca, and Yusuf, and Phyllis. It's a real privilege. I want to begin this afternoon, begin my remarks with a brief prayer. May the words of my mouth and the expressions of my heart be in line with your will as I stand before you, God, my rock and redeemer. I want to tell you now a little bit of my own story and how it came to be that I'm speaking with you here this afternoon. I grew up in a religious household. I grew up with chesed and tzedek, loving kindness, acts of loving kindness and justice, being central to what it means to be a Jew and a human being. I went to synagogue, Jewish day school, and Jewish summer camp. And at these institutions, I also learned that part of being Jewish was having blind support for the state of Israel. For many years growing up, I wanted to move to Israel and join the Israeli army. At the end of high school, when I was about 18, for the first time, I heard that there are Palestinians when I was 18 years old. And I learned that there are Palestinians who are indigenous to the land and were there prior to Zionist settlements, many of whom were displaced in 1948, hundreds of thousands. A few years later, when I was in college, I decided I wanted to go to Israel-Palestine and see the occupation with my own eyes. I went with Rabbis for Human Rights into the West Bank, and we went into a village, a Palestinian village, to help the villagers harvest olives that belonged to them. And during my first of these trips, we were attacked by settlers from a neighboring settlement, Jewish settlers, who came down with guns and rocks and attacked us. They sent a member of our group to the hospital that day, and that day I felt a real sense, on the one hand, of Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh, that all Jews are responsible for one another. Right? I felt responsible for the Israeli Jew who was sent to the ER with his head bashed open, for the Jewish settler who had hit him with the rock and debased his own humanity in the process. Also the 18-year-old soldiers who stood by, not doing anything, not knowing what to do. And I was angry and I was sad as I recalled the mitzvah, the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. That the Palestinian villagers were constantly being harassed and attacked by their neighbors who were colonizing their land, that they were unable to harvest their own olives, that they lived under a brutal military occupation. You see, I learned about this mitzvah, love your neighbor as yourself, from my grandmother, my Grandma Branya. And my Grandma Branya was a Holocaust survivor. She went through Auschwitz, and she survived the Holocaust because there were people who saved her life. There were Jews and non-Jews who saved her life. And all of those people had one thing in common. They all acted against their narrow self-interest to save her. Right? They put themselves in grave danger. They put themselves in grave danger to help her. And yet they did so, I think, anyway, I think that they did so because they needed to save their own humanity. And so I learned from her that part of what we do is we look out for our neighbors. Right? This is our sacred obligation, love your neighbor as yourself. I'm horrified by the plagues of the occupation, the demolition of Palestinian homes, the strangling blockade of Gaza, the administrative detention of Palestinian political prisoners, just to name a few. These plagues of occupation are violations of the most basic Jewish values. At the same time, however, I'm given hope by some of the things that we've heard about a little bit already. But I'm given hope and strength from the people on the ground who are non-violently resisting the Israeli occupation and building the kind of world that they want to live in. I see in their struggle the embodiment of the central Jewish narrative. That is the story of the Exodus, the story of the Exodus being the story of the Israelites moving from oppression to liberation. And today Palestinians are engaged in a liberation struggle. And so I'm given hope by the liberatory demonstrations that take place every single Friday, Friday after Friday, all throughout the West Bank. All throughout the West Bank, in Nilin, in Nabi Satha, and Al-Masra. Right? People go out week after week in the face of violent attack, in the face of arrests, and even death. They are acting with complete clarity that their goal is freedom and justice and dignity. And there are Israeli Jews who come out in solidarity week after week in support of their struggle because they understand that security, that real security and real liberation for Israelis is bound up in liberation and security for Palestinians. So I'm also given hope by the fact, as we've heard about, that there is a role for all of us to play in this struggle, in this nonviolent movement for justice and for equality. In 2005, as we've heard about, Palestinian civil society issued a call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and it was calling for three things. One is equal rights for Palestinian citizens of Israel, full equality. Second is an end to the occupation. And the third is the right of return for Palestinian refugees. And since then, as we've heard about, there has been a massive movement around the globe and in the US of faith-based organizations, of unions, of student movements, taking up inspiring campaigns to boycott and divest from companies that participate in and make possible Israel's violation of international law. So we've heard about some of those campaigns, some of the divestment that's taken place. I want to share a few others. One is what's happening on college campuses around the United States. There have been over 20 campaigns, boycott and divestment campaigns on US college campuses in the last couple of years. The financial giant TIAA-CREF has removed Veolia and Caterpillar from its social choice fund. Right? These two companies are targets around the world because of their role in the occupation. So Veolia formerly operated segregated buses in the West Bank, and they continue to dump settlement waste onto Palestinian land. And it's Caterpillar's weaponized bulldozers, which are used to demolish Palestinian homes. And that divestment, that divestment that TIAA-CREF made from Caterpillar was $73 million. Wow. $73 million. And just repeat, because I think it is so momentous, there was a huge vote this past Friday by the Presbyterian Church USA to divest $21 million from Hewlett-Packard and Motorola Solutions and Caterpillar. And Jewish Voice for Peace had the opportunity to be interfaith partners with the church in moving forward. So these moves don't target Israelis. They don't target Israel. They actually target American, European, international companies who are complicit in injustice, in expanding settlements, and in occupation. And divesting from these companies is in line with U.S. policy, which is clearly opposed to the settlements. I want to say a few words about Jewish Voice for Peace. We got to hear a little bit about it from Rebecca, but I sit on the Rabbinical Council of Jewish Voice for Peace, along with over 40 other Jewish clergy around the country. And Jewish Voice for Peace is an organization inspired by Jewish tradition to work for justice, equality, and self-determination for Israelis and Palestinians. We have over 140,000 supporters across every state and in over 100 countries. And we have 40 chapters in the United States. And as we've heard, Jewish Voice for Peace represents a massive shift in American Jewry. I'm part of a generation of American Jews who practice a meaningful and vibrant Judaism, and our Jewish values lead us to abhor the occupation and work for justice and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Last year, the Pew Center did a study which got a lot of media attention, which received a great deal of media attention, which tracks some of these changes. I'll just cite one of the statistics, which I think is interesting from that. They found that 48% of Jewish Americans don't think Israel is making a sincere attempt to make peace. That's half of American Jews. Right, so American Jews are opening their eyes to the realities of what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. Right, this is the trend throughout the Jewish world, and the politics and the Beltway are beginning to catch up. That's why we're here. There remain Jewish institutions that continue to defend the actions of the Israeli government, and many of those also simultaneously seek to silence those who work for justice and for equality. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that that story is actually like a famous fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. called The Emperor's New Clothes. Do folks know that story, The Emperor's New Clothes? So just the basics of it is this emperor, he wants the most magnificent outfit in the whole empire, and so he puts out this call to get people to come, and so these folks come and they pitch, we'll make you these clothes that they're amazing, they're so amazing, only the most deserving people in the whole kingdom can actually see them. Right, so they give them to him, and of course they give him nothing at all, but he doesn't want to pretend like he's not worthy, so he puts them on, and of course he's naked. And then he goes and parades around the whole city, and everyone plays along, right? Everyone plays along like he's wearing this magnificent outfit, right? They remain silent because they're afraid of what they might lose if they call out the charade, until a child blurts out, "The emperor has no clothes!" So we saw an example of this recently when J Street sought admission to the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. It's part of the Israel lobby that claims to speak in the name of all American Jews. So J Street sought admission, they're a moderate pro-Israel group, and they were rejected from the conference. I think it became clear that the conference's claims to represent all American Jews is a facade. And instead, they're really desperately out of touch with organizations like, I think they're desperately out of touch. So we talked about how we're at a big moment here. We're at an important moment where it's clear that the peace talks have collapsed. And one thing I think that we need to learn from this collapse is that the United States needs to do more than just talk. Right? The United States needs to do more than just talk. We're at a moment when our government can and must choose to enforce its policy opposing the settlements and begin to put pressure on the Israeli government to end the occupation. I want to close by sharing a quick teaching from the Torah, from the Bible, from the book of Esther, which speaks to action, I think, to the action that needs to be taken. We have something to learn from the book of Esther, I think. Two characters in particular, Esther and Mordecai. Mordecai is Esther's uncle. And in this story, Esther, who is Jewish, marries the king. But she does not tell him that she's Jewish, so she's closeted. The king doesn't know. Now the king's chief advisor, Haman, decides he hates the Jews. The Jews will not bow down to him. Mordecai will not bow down to him. And so he comes up with this plan where he's going to murder all of the Jews. Now Esther is in this position where she has the ability to potentially change his mind, right? She's in a position of power here, but she's reluctant to do so because speaking out might put her in danger. And so Mordecai, Esther's uncle, who is on the outside of the palace, right? He's trying to stop what's happening and encourage Esther to act. Sends her a message. He sends Esther a message. And these are the words. I want to share with you the words that Mordecai says to Esther. He says, "Who knows? Perhaps you have come to a position of power for exactly this time." Who knows? Perhaps you have come to a position of power for precisely this moment. I think Mordecai's rhetorical question is an appeal for Esther to do what is within her power to change the situation. And I think this can also be our prayer. Let this be our prayer this afternoon, that we have the compassion and the courage to do what is within our power to bring justice and equality and security and self-determination to Palestinians and to Israelis. Who knows, perhaps we have all come to our positions of power for exactly this time. Thank you.